Bava Batra Daf Yomi Bava Batra. Truth at what cost? Cedut achat להזמה. Truth is central to every aspect of the Torah. The whole Torah is about truth, and Chotamo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu emes, that the Ribono Shel Olam defines himself through emes. Simon, good morning. And yet even truth is not at any cost. There are times when one has to package truth, when one has to sugarcoat the truth, when one has to deal with the truth in a diplomatic way, and we'll see some of the principles behind that. To understand the piece of Gemara we're doing, we have to understand the principle of Eidim Zomamin, which we'll deal with in much greater detail when we get to the next Masechta, to Sanhedrin. The only way that we can know for sure that a set of witnesses are false is through hazama. Hazama means that another set of witnesses come and they say, we give evidence that you were not at the scene of the crime on that day, you were in a different country, you were with us. If another set of witnesses simply come and say, let's say, first set of witnesses say A murdered B, and another set of witnesses come and say A did not murder B, we don't know who's telling the truth. They're two doubtful sets of witnesses. But if it's the second set found to be genuine, say these, we don't know whether A killed B. That's not what we've come to give evidence about. All we've come to give evidence about is that these witnesses weren't at the scene of the crime at the time they say they were. Then those first witnesses are called Eidim Zomamin, and the Torah says, V'asita lo kasher zamam lasot lachiv, then you give him the punishment that he was plotting to cause his friend to get through the false evidence he was giving. So now we have a fascinating case study in the Mishnah, which is what happens then if two people give evidence that there's a chazakah, that a particular individual has, Steve isn't here, but his property is still around, so there are two witnesses that give evidence that I occupied Steve's property for 3 years, and it's untrue. And those witnesses are found to be Eidim Zomamim. So they were trying to cause Steve to lose his property by giving false evidence that I had occupied it for 3 years. They're found to be false. They then have to pay Steve. Not only does the property get returned to Steve, but they pay him the value of the property. Here comes the twist. What happens if three different sets of witnesses come, each give evidence for 1 year? So two witnesses say, I know that this person occupied the field for year 1. Another set come for year 2. Another set for year 3. We aggregate the three evidences and we make it one. And we say, we have evidence that he was there for 3 years. The fact that that's constituted by three separate sets of witnesses doesn't matter. However, and here comes an additional twist. What happens if one of each of the three sets of witnesses is a brother of the other two? So it's a brother and a stranger, brother and a stranger, brother and a stranger. Now, three brothers are giving evidence about the same chazakah, and we aggregate it into one set of evidence. That means we've now got brothers giving evidence on the same issue. No, says the Mishnah, from that perspective, we treat them as three different cases. Each one's talking about a different year. And says Tosfos, just as I could give evidence on the first year and give evidence with another witness on the second year, and I could join a third witness on the third year, so my brothers can do the same thing. These are three different sets of evidence. Now comes the further twist. What happens if these witnesses are found to be zomamin? They're found to be false witnesses, all 6 of them. Well, it's really 4 of them, isn't that right? Because we've got one stranger in each of the 3 sets and 3 brothers. So there are 4 individuals. They're all found to be zomimim. During the period that they're talking about the chazakah, that this person occupied the land, they were not in the country at all. They were far away. They couldn't have possibly known that. So now the question is, how does that hazama work? So the Mishnah says, Meshalshelin beinehem, shlosha achim ve'echad mistarif amim, harei elu shalosh eduyot. So they are 3 sets of evidence, and therefore we're not worried about the fact that they're brothers giving evidence on the chazakah. We accept their evidence. However, hein edut achat lahazama. When it comes to hazama, they are one group, it's one set of evidence, it's one case. There are 3 cases about 3 different years. They get aggregated into one for the purpose of hazama. For the purpose of hazama, of being found a false witness, it's considered one case. And therefore, as the Rashbam says, ein nizomin ad sheyazumu kulan, and therefore they all have to be found to be false in order for the principles of hazama to be applied. That's how most of the Rishonim learn the Mishnah. The Rimigash goes out on a limb and learns it totally differently. And what seems to be motivating the Rimigash to learn it differently is that the way we've just learned it, the Rashbam's way, and Tosfos's way, and the Ramban's way, and the Ramah's way, there doesn't seem to be much of a chidush in this last piece of the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says 3 brothers and another one joins them for each of the 3 years, Harei elu shalosh ediyot, these are 3 different sets of evidence. We kind of know that from the first part of the Mishnah. And v'hein edut achat lahazama, if that means that they all have to be found to be edim zomamim in order for the principles of edim zomamim to apply, that's also something that's fairly obvious. That's not a chidush in the Mishnah. The chidush, says the Rimigash, is the opposite. V'hein edut achat lahazama means, since we aggregate it into one set of evidence as far as hazama is concerned. So again, what we're doing is we're bifurcating the evidence, and we're saying one piece of the evidence deals with the 3 years of chazakah. Was there occupation for 3 years or not? That's facts. Another piece of it is around hazama. If there is a second tier to the case where these witnesses are found to be false, that's a second case. And we bifurcate those 2 cases. But in that second case, says the Rimigash, we're aggregating it into one set of witnesses and one case of evidence, which means you've now got 3 brothers giving witnesses together. And that we can't have. And therefore, hazama doesn't work. You can't be mazim them. Contrary to everybody else, the way the Rashbam learns it and others are learning it, is if there is hazama, then she'im huzmu v'shalshilim benehem v'gamen izumin ad she'yazumu kulan. They've all got to be found to be false. I get it, but you can do it. They can be found to be false. That means the 3 brothers and the stranger, all 4 of them are found to be false. Says the Rimigash, no way, they cannot be found to be false, because you've got 2 brothers together. What's the problem with 2 brothers together? The problem is the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which you've got on the top of the next page, where the Gemara goes into the whole question of how do we know banim la'alma menalan? How do you know the 2 brothers can't give evidence together to the rest of the world? You know a father can't give evidence against a son. The son can't give evidence against a father. We know that about avot habanim. But how do you know the 2 brothers cannot give evidence to an outsider? Amar Rabbi Bar Chama Svaruhu, says Rabbi Bar Chama, that's logical, it's obvious. Why? Ki detanya, as we've learnt in the Brisa, Ein ha'edim nasim zomamin ad she'yazumu shnehem. Witnesses can only be made false, zomamin, if they are both found false, not one of them. So what happens now? Reuven and Shimon are brothers. They're giving evidence against another person altogether. They're found to be zomamin. Now, if only one of them would have been giving evidence, then there wouldn't have been an Eid Zomain. And let's say there's a death sentence involved. So and now these 2 brothers get the death sentence. Why is Reuven getting the death sentence? Because Shimon was also found to be an Eid Zomain. Shimon's his brother. Why is Shimon getting the death sentence? Not only because he was found to be false, but his brother was also found to be false. So the brothers are indirectly causing one another's death as a punishment for the false evidence they've given. And how can you have a brother causing the death? Says Rava, and Rava says, but then what about our Mishnah here? Shlosha achin ve'echad mitzrafim. You see that you can be zomim, 3 brothers are giving evidence, and yet we're not worried that the one brother is causing the death of the other one. But so what do you say? Says the Gemara there. You've got to totally bifurcate this thing. This is about hazama comes later. So the fact that the 2 brothers are giving evidence together about an event, that would be all right. Now there's a question of hazama. Just as an aside, the whole issue of Eidut Shiyata Yachol Hazima, that means this is evidence that you can't possibly be mazim, it should be false evidence. Rav Shach deals with that in a foundational piece in Perek Chaf Aleph of Hilchos Eidus. He answers that in a magnificent way. So we won't deal with that at the moment. What we'll deal with is just the fact that we've got to so separate this that first we deal with, can they give evidence on the event? Secondly, can one be mazim them? If you can give evidence on the event, where do you know that from? That we need a posuk for. And that's the Ovos Halbonim, which the Gemara learns out there. So the Yad Ramah and the Ramban and others ask on the Rimigash, how can the Rimigash use the Gemara in Sanhedrin as his reasoning as to why this can't work? These two witnesses can't be mezim one, they can't be muzam, you can't bring hazama against them because they're brothers. How do you know that? You see in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the brothers can't cause hazama one for the other. Says the Yad Ramah, but that's pushed aside. That was a suggestion and the Gemara pushes it away. Why does, and it's true the Yerushalmi stays that way and the Rimi Gash brings the Yerushalmi. But at the end of the day, the Bavli, our Gemara doesn't hold that way, doesn't stick with it. And so the Yad Ramah asks 4 very powerful questions on the Rimi Gash and rejects the Rimi Gash. Remember, the Rimi Gash was the most exceptional Talmud of the Rif. And the Rambam writes about the Rimi Gash, his father's Rebbe, this is kind of this, there isn't anybody in the Torah world that can touch the Rimi Gash. So we're talking about somebody of stupendous magnitude. You can't just push him aside, even with the Ramah's 4 questions. And even though nobody else learns like the Rimi Gash, and that's part of the beauty of the Rimi Gash. He's so original and so fearless. How do we deal with it? So Moshe Shapiro was the mashgiach, was the Rosh Yeshiva in Be'er Yaakov. When I was in Yeshiva, he only died about 20 years ago. Moshe Shapiro was a great Rosh Yeshiva. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Chonon, Rabbi Baruch Ber, and later the Brisker Rov. He was a great Rosh Yeshiva in Be'er Yaakov. In my time, he was one of the great young Rosh Yeshivas who had learnt in Eastern Europe. So as I've said to you often, Reb Nochem and my Rosh Yeshiva, Reb Eli Mishkovsky and Reb Shmuel Rozovsky and Reb Moshe Shapiro were that young generation of Rosh Yeshivas who had learned from the greats in Eastern Europe. And he did a lot of work on the Rimi Gash. We only have patches of Rimi Gash quoted by other people. We have very little of it. But he put together the Rimi Gash on Bava Batra. He went to the British Museum, among other things, and in the British Museum he found a work by Reb Zechariah ben Yehuda Halevi from, known as Ha'agmati, from Agmat, which is a town in Morocco, who lived at the time of the Rimi Gash, just the later years of the Rimi Gash. And he quotes a whole lot of the Rimi Gash, especially on Bava Batra. And Rav Moshe Shapiro puts the Rimi Gash and Bava Batra together and writes a magnificent Perush on the Rimi Gash. He works on the Rimi Gash so hard that he writes a Perush, and he answers the Rimi Gash here. And he says that there's a difference between where we learn something from and what the reason for something is. You learn it technically from Psukim, which is what the Gemara in Sanhedrin is talking about. But the Gemara doesn't retract from the philosophic principle that you don't set a brother against another brother. That's misvora. The Rami Bar Chana says that's obvious. Surely you know that. If a father can't give evidence against a son, how can you have 2 brothers giving evidence on a third person when those 2 brothers could indirectly cause each other's death or other form of punishment if they're found to be Zomamim, and then you're setting brother up against brother? That principle we don't retract from. A beautiful piece of Reb Moshe Shapiro. I haven't printed it out for you, but it's on you can download it. It's on the source sheets. So what we see from here is, even though we want to know the truth, what happens if we know these brothers are telling the truth? Before the case of Hazama, we know that these brothers are telling the truth. Surely we want brothers, and there are other witnesses with them. We know they're telling the truth. And now we can't accept them as witnesses because we don't want to set brothers up against one another in case if such and such would happen. Surely the truth is more important than the brothers having a bit of an argument with one another. And we see from there that that's not so. The Medrash Rabbah says in the beginning of Bereshis, when Hashem wanted to create man and all the different angels got into groups, Chesed says, create man, he'll do Chesed. Emes says, don't create man, he won't be honest. Tzedek says, create man, he'll do Tzedakah. Shalom says, don't create man, there'll be Machlokas, there'll be dissential. And Hashem, what did he do? Natal emet v'hishlicho la'aretz. Hashem takes Emes and throws him out, so now he's got a majority. He's acting politically, it would seem. He's got 2 against 2. He's got 4 sets of angels, and he hasn't got consensus. So he throws Emes out, and now he's got 2 against 1. Now the Rebbeinu Shem makes a democratic decision. What's important there is which one does he choose to throw out? He throws out Emes, asks the Medrash, and the angels say, Rebbeinu Shalom, Emes of all the 4, you throw out Emes, that's the most important one. Says the Rebbeinu Shalom, humanity will find a way to come out with a truth that works, a truth that doesn't disrupt Shalom. Because if truth disrupts Shalom, it isn't truth. That's something that we have. It might look like truth, but it isn't truth. And that's like the Gemara says in Yovas, Mutar lo la'adam l'shanot bidvar shalom. If peace is at issue, you're allowed to tell a lie. If that's the only way around, then the Rebbeinu Shalom himself did that. Because to put emes before shalom, that means it isn't emes. There's somebody I know who the other day destroyed a lifelong relationship because he said, I've got to tell the person the truth. Honesty is a core value of mine. I've got to tell him the truth. And he destroyed the relationship. When your truth undermines shalom, the chances are you're not motivated by truth. The chances are you're motivated by your desire to prove yourself right, rather than true to be truth. Because if it's truth, you don't undermine shalom. And Reb Chaim Shmulevitz used to say, based on the posuk of V'chol netivotei shalom, if the Torah you're teaching leads to machloket, if it leads to dissension, you know it isn't Torah. You know it's inauthentic. You know it can't be true. Because emes requires shalom as the underpinning of it. You can't have anything different. And we see that the way Reb Moshe Shapiro explains the Rimi Gash, or explains the Gemara in Sanhedrin, according to the Rimi Gash, that we're not willing to drive a wedge between two brothers and pit one against the other, because the family is a single integrated unit. And to break that integrated unit for emes, that's not the emes that the Torah wants to see. Shalom always has to be put first, and emes has to be delivered in such a way that it doesn't shatter the peace.